Chapter 4. Valor isn't always a loud roar. Courage can also be the quiet yes. Voltaire Uriah, Founding of the Voltaire, Volume 1. After negotiating a shipping deal with Fair Heinrich, Stefan waved to Iliad as he departed a half-hour after Gerol. In the hallway connecting the dining room to the foyer, all talking ceased amongst the clusters of nobles as he passed. And he met the same silence as he strode into the foyer and out the door held open by the head servant. It must have been quite the show for everyone. Word about the encounter would spread quickly, but that was to his advantage. Reputation was everything. Even after spewing hours of rain, the clouds retained their ominous grey as they hovered over the city. But having endured Dale's torrential storms his entire life, Stefan did not worry. Instead, he took advantage of the reprieve and strolled down the bleached cobblestone main street to his home, Dale Keep. His father refused to provide him with his own carriage or horse, and he did not want to waste his money that can be better spent investing. Besides, he enjoyed walking, which afforded easier access to his less reputable contacts. His father did not completely neglect Stefan's needs. The young man lived at Dale Keep, ate well, and received an allowance for his clothing. Stefan brushed a few errant raindrops from his long-sleeved velvet doublet with red and white trim. He maintained the latest fashion while not attracting attention to himself. The gold brooch bearing his father's crest glinted in the mid-morning sun at his left lapel and served as his only accessory. Other trinkets were a waste. As Stefan continued down the street, considering expenditures he would eliminate, he heard something out of place. The wind? No, it sounded like a bird. He looked down the alley to his left, and halfway down the narrow street a small, emphatic hand waved at him. The sound had been a faint whistle. Stefan usually ignored such encounters since he received network updates via written notes at the keep. Ambitious cubs, members of his little spy network, sometimes wanted to make a name for themselves and attract his attention with a personal meeting, but the urgency piqued his curiosity. He casually turned down the alley and kept scanning entrances and exits, wary of the unexpected summons. When he approached, Stefan found a boy, shaking with wide eyes and a pale, dirty face. "What's wrong?" Stefan asked. "I'm... Dirt. I know it's against the rules to talk to you." He jerked his head up and down the alley. "But you have to know." Stefan crouched down to the kid's level. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old. "What do I have to know, Dirt?" The kid scanned the alley again. "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. I was tailing Gianna and Frack's patrol when they found something strange off of Aerial Lane. I kept back like I was supposed to do, but something got a hold of them." Dirt's eyes blinked. "They're lying on the ground. They're not moving. They're not breathing." Stefan furrowed his brow and his mind raced. "What had they found?" "I don't know. But whatever it is seems no one else is supposed to know. I'm going to be canned for it, but you should know," Dirt replied. Stefan stood and scanned the alley again. The kid could be lying. These street urchins were consummate actors. Still, Gerol could be causing trouble, and it was better to be safe than sorry. Stefan handed the kid a half-silver crown. "Pass the word to the leaders. Hibernate. Got it?" Dirt nodded emphatically. Every cub should know what that meant. "Take the main street and go," Stefan said. Dirt pocketed the coin and bolted without any further prompting. Stefan's mind continued to race through possibilities as he marched back up the alley. There wasn't much of anything by Ariel Lane except a few low-end shops pretending to offer high-end goods. Would Garol have had 2 of his cubs killed to send a message? Stefan had expected some retaliation from the Cal, which was why his network was on high alert. But if Garol was targeting his network, then Stefan should protect them. He had a soft spot in his heart for the young urchins, but they had been cancelled on the dangers when they signed up. Would it be enough if they laid low? Sure. The cubs should be protected as long as they remained out of sight. Stefan expected to receive further updates when he returned to the keep. Should he tell the King's Army garrison full commander? Stefan stopped just as the keep's outer wall came into view. If Garol was targeting anything related to Stefan, shouldn't he try to stop it? But how did he know if the incident actually involved Garol? No, he said aloud to himself as he continued on the main street to the keep. He would have to explain more than he wanted to. Once he returned to the keep, he could have an anonymous tip sent to the local fall commander. That assuaged his conscience. He had already spent enough resources organizing the mourning, and his father probably would not appreciate what he had done to Garol. Not that his father should care, as Garol's father, Cuv Brun, lived in Sheorn's protectorate, not Dale's. But Stefan did not want to risk it. His father's wrath was something to fear. So it was best not to draw attention to himself today. 5 quon guards bowed to him at the gate, and Stefan maintained a brisk pace through the bailey. A small force of 10 quon guards stood at attention just inside the gate, and Stefan recognized the same formation when his father had previously left without his guard. Stefan had criticized the guards' petulant behavior before, but he recognized its significance now. He considered where his father might have gone when he stopped short before the stables. The carriage was gone. He checked the muted sun's position. The pieces clicked into place. He froze. Maybe he was overthinking. He had done that many times before. Suppressing his intuition, Stefan argued that he needed more information before running around making assumptions. Scurrying through the halls of the keep and up the grand central stairs, Stefan angled around corners with familiar ease as he headed to his quarters. His sister's door stood open, confirming she was not inside. Stefan ripped out the small key from his inner shirt pocket and threw open his door, after fiddling with the lock for a second. From the door, Stefan could see the empty desktop. No message. At his desk, he began rifling through the drawers and scanning the ground, hopeful for any misplaced parchment. Nothing. He should have at least gotten a report on Garol. Had his network been paralyzed? Stefan ran toward his open bedroom door. He had to tell the captain and the fall commander. I have to do something. Stefan halted at the door. Do I, though? Again, did he have all the information he needed to make a correct assessment? Maybe it was coincidental. If he was wrong, he might lose a lot of money. If he was right, his family could be in trouble. No, Garol would not go that far. It made little sense for Garol to go after the quon. Quon Derringer of Dale had a reputation of his own that had kept the Speronese on the other side of the Ealdrin River for years. If Garol attacked the quon, it would ruin him more than Stefan ever could. Stefan closed the door to his room. He just had to let the day play out and hope everyone, including Dirt, was safe. Pol strode past small stores on his way back to his father's cobbler shop and his home. Ariel Lane merchants boasted some of the best quality and wares in the city, even though they were not next to the high-end stores on Dale's Main Street. Pol would be ashamed of his father's abandonment of the family's legacy, but his father's diligent attention to detail and quality work made Pol proud to work beside him and learn from him. The rain had stopped, and Pol navigated around mud puddles in the street, not wanting to ruin his training shoes. Even though he had left the keep grounds, Pol kept his head down out of habit. He'd received enough lessons from his father and indignant nobles to risk offending someone on the street. Everyone in Dale learned how to recognize the different brooches, signifying status throughout the country. The nobles prided themselves on their status. Pol said, "You can have it," to no one. The only status symbol he wanted was a grunt tunic from the king's army. He would have preferred to start as an officer, but he couldn't afford entry into the officer academy in Ariel, the capital city. He could still make officer one day, and when he did, he would earn enough to help take care of his family. A few blocks away from his home on Ariel Lane, Pol spied a carriage farther down the street. Only wealthy merchants or nobles owned carriages, which often rolled past the house in search of particular wares. Sometimes, his father would have Pol set up displays to entice riders in those carriages. While Pol had never ridden in one, he told himself that he never needed to. The approaching carriage was larger than most. As it drew closer, Pol could make out the red and white trim, signifying the quon of Dale's personal carriage. She would be in it. Quelladil had never talked to him, but ever since he'd spied her through the carriage window one day as he returned from the keep, Pol rarely missed an opportunity to see her. Sure, she was a noble, and one of the highest ranked as a daughter of Quon Derringer. Only a princess would rank higher. But Pol wondered if her interior was as beautiful as the exterior. Thoughts of Adil curbed his irritation of having to step off the street to accommodate the carriage. He had a momentary thought to remain in the street and make the carriage go around him. Why do I always have to get out the way? When horses drawing the carriage came closer with their hooves clopping, he remembered what his father had said before. Living with nobles is not always fair, but it's the way things are. Are you going to let your anger rule you? Pol often had to repeat that to himself. He stepped off the street, as usual, and watched the carriage approach. At least, he would get to see her. Through the passenger window, a beautiful young maiden stared out with her chin in her hand. When their eyes met, Pol froze. She rarely looked at him, but he rarely looked up either. Her smooth brown skin and long brown hair framed a delicate face with high cheekbones. Her deep brown eyes caused him to catch his breath. Quelladil, daughter of Quon Derringer, had a beauty that did not disappoint. Given her status, Pol should have lowered his eyes. But he didn't, and she tilted her head at him. She did not look like a noble to Pol. Nobles were not beautiful like her. But, as the carriage continued, the red and white colours reminded him of the quon, and Pol thought he glimpsed the local ruler in the carriage as well. Suddenly, Pol crashed forward to the ground, from a sharp crack to his head. He landed on his hands and knees as his vision swam, but he did not black out. Pol raised his head to see what hit him. A figure in a dark green hood rushed the carriage. The image took a few seconds to register. The figure reached the carriage and ripped open the side door. The girl's scream pierced Pol's brain. He jumped to his feet and barreled towards the carriage. Noble or not, this was wrong. The assailant threw Quelladil to the ground while retaining a fistful of her dark hair. The carriage driver yanked on the reins and the carriage skidded to a stop with the horses rearing. Pol closed the distance to the assailant, who had pivoted toward the carriage with his back turned to Pol. The assailant reached for something underneath his tunic and hurled it into the carriage as Pol rammed his shoulder into the assailant's back. The assault sent the enemy reeling to the right as Pol lurched to the left. Pol rolled through the muddy street and came to his feet. Having picked up a loose stone his hand has found. Adil had been thrown to the side, and Pol stepped toward her, hoping to prevent further harm. The assailant cut him off and tore off his green cloak, revealing a black leather jerkin and several sheathed daggers. Years of training with his uncle screamed at Pol to take the offensive at such a disadvantage. Reacting, Pol hurled the stone he had picked up at the enemy's head and charged. A left arm parried the stone, giving Pol an opportunity to strike the left flank. A hidden leather cuirass met his fist, and the attacker's right fist aimed for Pol's face. Pol leaned back, but the right hook caught his lower jaw. Grunting as he took the hit, Pol kept his balance and kicked the man's legs out from under him, just as Ish has done to him earlier. Pol jumped on the man's chest, but not before a dagger plunged into his right thigh. The assailant tried to wrestle Pol off, but the enemy's boots kept slipping in the mud. Pol roared in pain, but he maintained his position atop the man while pinning the enemy's right hand with his left. Gritting his teeth, Pol deflected a punch and pummeled the man's face with Ish's words burning in his mind. "You might want to take a crack at the face." Pol didn't stop, even when the man went limp underneath him. A hand pulled his right shoulder. Pol whipped his head around and cocked his fist to face Quon Derringer. The Quon placed his hand on Pol's fist. "It's done, boy. It's done." The noble had dark brown skin, a chiseled face, and short grey hair. A gold brooch with a small crown on top, rubies and what looked like a ship adorned his red coat and glinted in the morning sun. Pol dropped his fist and turned back, realizing the enemy lay unconscious. Blood seeped from the assailant's deformed nose, and both eyes were swollen and closed. But the man still drew breath. Pol held up his hands. Blood covered his lacerated knuckles. He inhaled sharply as he sat back. Pain seared his right leg, and a wave of dizziness threatened to knock him out. The dagger still protruded from his right thigh. Unsure if it was wise, Pol gritted his teeth and pulled out the dagger. He groaned with the pain, seeing the blood gush from the wound. He swallowed black bile and tore his brown tunic off his chest, feeling lightheaded. The Quon took the tunic from Pol's hands, ripped it further, and began tightly wrapping Pol's leg. "Should have left the dagger for the cleric. Here, apply pressure." With a deep breath, Pol pushed on the wound with two hands and leaned into the next wave of dizziness. He fought to remain upright. Sobs from behind him pierced Pol's awareness. Once Quon Derringer finished the dressing, he went to Adil and placed his arms around her. She had a bloody scrape over her left temple, but didn't seem to have serious injuries. "It's okay, dear," the Quon said to her as he knelt down. Adil hugged her father, who turned to Pol and asked, "What's your name?" "Pol," he replied with gritted teeth. Pol, thank you for saving us. Pol gave a single nod and, out of instinct, asked, Is she okay? She'll be sore, but otherwise fine. Even with her hair disheveled and her face blotchy from crying, Pol couldn't help but appreciate her dark brown eyes. He felt a small constraint on his heart as he noted the gold brooch on her now muddy green dress. As the next wave of dizziness hit, he became self-conscious that Dale was shirtless and covered in blood and mud. 24 soldiers with hard, fast footfalls came around the corner, led by the quon's carriage driver. Ish broke formation upon seeing Pol. Pol? What did you do? There was alarm in his eyes as he looked from Pol's hands to Adil. Quon Derringer stood and held out a hand. Peace! He just saved our lives. But how do you know this boy? Ish bowed his head and avoided the quon's eyes. My liege, he is my nephew. How is it that this boy saved my life from an assassin? The quon's change to a harsh tone surprised Pol. Was he wrong to have helped? Ish shot a quick glance to his captain, standing beside him. The officer nodded to Ish, who then replied, My liege, he is trained in combat. Did you train him? Yes, my liege. Peace be with you. I'm not angry with you or anyone here. I'm angry at myself. My daughter is injured, and I did not have the chance to protect her because this boy did everything for me. What's your name? Ish stood up straight, and Pol held his breath even amidst the pain. Would he say it? Second Sergeant Ish Vroshin. Pol's eyes widened. He said it out loud, with people around. The quon froze. Vroshin? Is this boy also a Vroshin? Ish nodded slowly. Yes, my liege. Pol's eyes widened. The quon knew. What would happen to their family now? The quon took his time as he assisted his daughter to her feet. This boy has brought great honor to that infamous name. He turned to Pol. But, given that name, it is to be expected. You are safe here. The quon looked at the quon guards. Is that clear, Captain? Yes, my quon. Even through the pain, Pol's heart lifted in hope. The quon looked around. A crowd had started gathering. We have taken too much time. Secure the assassin. I want answers within the hour. The captain saluted with his right fist held over his heart. Yes, my quon. Are you hurt? No. Loam's hand protected me, but this young man sustained a knife wound. Get him to the infirmary. He turned to Ish as if he wanted to say something more, but addressed the captain instead. I should have accepted your offer this morning. When you declined an escort, I'm sorry that I didn't insist. No, this is my fault. I put my daughter in harm's way. He assisted Adil into the carriage. Pol tore his eyes away from Adil and focused on his bleeding hands. The pain overwhelmed his adrenaline, and nausea assaulted him. He made it to his feet, but more blood seeped from under the makeshift bandage. As he took a half step forward, his right thigh wouldn't support his weight, and he went down on his right knee. Ish lunged forward, taking Pol's arm and putting it around his shoulder. Slowly, Ish stood up with him. The captain took Pol's other arm over his shoulder. Quon Derringer motioned. Come, put him in the carriage. Send someone for Cleric Rian. Pol shook his head. He didn't want any favours from a nobleman. His uncle gently elbowed him in the ribs and guided him to the carriage seat. Pol grunted as he sat down on the plush, velvet blue bench. If his mother saw how he was getting blood and mud on that velvet, she would have finished the assassin's job. I'll catch up to you, Pol, Ish whispered. Glad you're okay. Loam protects you, but don't do anything stupid. Pol cocked his head slightly, and Ish chuckled. Don't do anything else stupid. As Ish left, Pol realized Quella Deal sat across from him. She had her hand to her temple, but didn't take her eyes off him. He wanted to say anything, even a simple hello, but the pain overwhelmed any attempt. He focused on staying upright. Quon Derringer entered the carriage on the other side. When he closed the door, Pol noticed the dagger lodged in the wooden rail above the Quon's head. The Quon wrenched it out. That could have been my head. If you hadn't hit him, Pol, I might be dead. The reality hit Pol hard as he held his leg, but he kept silent and simply nodded. The Quon called out, To the keep! As the carriage pulled away, the captain shouted to his soldiers, Bring that man to the dungeon! Sweep the area! He may not have been alone. Pol grimaced as the carriage lurched forward. This was not how he had envisioned his first carriage ride. Stacia backed away from the roof's edge. The attempt had failed, but the effect would be the same. The High Council would be pleased, as Fenric's target should be delivered as divined. She shivered in glee. Each success secured her future. Anvil, the worthless assassin, would betray Garol in the dungeon as expected. Money rarely purchased loyalty. And she would be one step closer to completing her mission. Another win. The unexpected surprise was locating the Vroshan line. Quon, her master, would be very pleased. He was in the business of finding heroes.